Lesson 324, applying the quadratic formula. So the objectives for this lesson is going to be these three here. We have the first one, which is what is the quadratic formula? Pretty basic. The second one, which is how do I use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation? And third, what is the discriminant and what does it do? So again, those three objectives for this lesson. So here's our vocabulary. So the first one we have here is our quadratic equation. This is the one that we have in standard form. We've been working with this pretty much all year so far. We have our ax squared plus bx plus c. Right? We've graphed this and we've factored this. The second thing we have here is our quadratic formula. And this is brand new to us. So using this here, it's kind of like a form of factoring. So if we use this here, these gives us the x-intercepts as well. So it's a form of factoring, gives us our x-intercepts. And the last thing we have here is our discriminant. And the discriminant here pretty much tells us how many x values we're going to have. Okay, and notice that it's pretty much the same exact thing as we have here in the quadratic formula, right? Square root of b squared minus 4ac. Okay. On a side note, so the discriminant, when we simplify this here, there's three options that we get. If it's a negative number, we're going to have no solution, meaning we have no x-intercepts. So if we look at a graph that we have, and it's going to be a parabola because these are quadratic, no x-intercepts means our graph is going to look something like this, where the vertex is above the x-intercept and it never crosses the x-intercept because this opens upward. So that would be no solution. And that's if the discriminant is negative. Then we have 0. It's possible to get 0 under here. If we get a 0 under here, that means we have one solution. One solution means that our parabola, our vertex is going to be on the x-axis, and it can open either up or down. So it'll look something like this. Right? So you see here, we only have one x-intercept, one solution. And our final outcome is that the discriminant can turn out to be positive. So this here can turn out to be the square root of a positive number, which means we have two solutions. And our graph would look something like this, where we have one x-intercept, two x-intercepts, or the other way around, one x-intercept, two x-intercepts. Moving on, so our prereq skills. So we want to begin with writing this in our note card for our factoring test. So we're going to use this formula here, right? And this you should have written down. It's pretty valuable to write down. We're gonna see it a lot. So going here, we want to first go ahead and list A, B, and C. Okay, so we know A is going to be 2, B is -1, C is -3. And we're going to plug it into the quadratic formula. So again, you can reflect back to see what the quadratic formula is. It's right here. So we have negative times -b. Oh, instead of b, I'm going to put in the number -1 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that's -1 squared minus 4 times a times c. And notice how I just plugged in all the values that we have here. All divided by 2 times a, which is 2 times 2. Now we go on to simplifying everything. So we're going to simplify this here first. Negative times -1, that gives us 1, plus or minus. And then we got to work on our square root, right? Our discriminant section. So -1 squared, that's -1 times -1, that gives us +1. Minus, we can simplify this out too. So minus 4 times a times c. So that is 4 times 2 is 8 or negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 3 gives me positive 24. So plus 24. It looks like I used too much here. And then all divided by 2 times a, which is 2 times 2, which is 4. So now I'm going to go ahead and simplify the discriminant here. 1 plus 24, so this is 1 plus or minus the square root of 25 divided by 4. So still simplifying here, the square root of 25 can be broken down into 5. So this is really going to get split into 1 plus 5 divided by 4, and then a 1 minus 5 divided by 4. Right, because this here can simplify down. Square root of 25 is 5, which is why we have these two 5s here. And we just split that plus or minus from the formula. So now simplifying these out, 1 plus 5 is 6 divided by 4. 1 minus 5 is a negative 4 divided by 4. And then our final answers would be, this would simplify to 1.5 as one of our x-intercepts. And this here will simplify to negative 4 divided by 4 as a negative 1 as our other x-intercept. So our two x-intercepts here, I'll go ahead and box it in purple. Those are two x-intercepts. When we go and look at the graph for this, those will be the two x-intercepts. Right? And we know we have two x-intercepts because the discriminant here was a positive number, which means we should have two solutions. Okay, so again, that vocabulary page is pretty valuable to reflect upon. Okay, now going to the lesson. So pretty much we're going to do the same thing for all four of these. And I'll work them out one by one. And I just because I don't have much room to work with here, I have to write a little bigger. But pretty much label A, B, and C, plug it in. So I have my A, I have my B, and I have my C. And we're going to jump from this page to the next page just because it's the same exact problems. But here it's asking to use the discriminant. Okay, so I have my A and I have my B and I have my C. So I'm going to start with just plugging it into the quadratic equation here. The quadratic formula, quadratic equation. So we have negative B, which is negative 13 plus or minus square root 13 squared minus 4 times A times C. And all divided by 2 times A, which is 5. Okay, so again, so we just start with plugging in and then we go on to simplifying. So let me erase this here so we have more room to work with. Okay, so now simplifying. This here turns into negative 13 plus or minus. We have the square root. Let's see, 13 squared gives us 169. 169. Negative 4, so now I'm looking here, negative 4 times 5 times 6. See, negative 4 times 5 times 6 gives me a negative 120. Some of this here. All divided by 2 times 5 is 10. So I'm going to again simplify the discriminant further. So this is So this is negative 13 plus or minus square root 169 divided by or subtracted by 120 gives me positive 149. So notice there we have a positive discriminant, so we should have two x-intercepts. Dang it. I don't know why I wrote 149. It is 49 divided by 10. Okay, now we can still simplify the square root of 49. It's not going to always be the case where we can't simplify this, where square root is perfect. But here it does. Square root of 49 is 7. So you want to split this into 2. So we have negative 13 plus 7 divided by 10. And we have negative 13 minus 7 divided by 10. Okay, and again, it's because we have that plus or minus here. And then this simplifies down to 7. Okay, simplifying this out. Negative 13 plus 7 gives us a negative 6 over 10. This gives us a negative 20 over 10. And simplifying for our final answer, this here is negative 0.6. That's one of our x-intercepts. And this here is a negative 2. And that's our other x-intercept. And that's it. So we use the quadratic formula. We found our 2 x-intercepts. So now I'm going to erase this so I can go on to the next one. And again, if you need, you're always welcome to go ahead and pause these videos so you can catch up or copy. Okay, so now we're looking at x squared plus 8x plus 16. Remember, I have my a, I have my b, and I have my c. And my a here is 1. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to plug it straight in. Negative b, that's negative 8. I'm going to forget that this is here. We have negative 8 plus or minus square root b squared, which is 8 squared, minus 4 times a times c. Okay. All divided by 2 times a, which is 1. So I'm going to plug in my 1. Okay. Now simplifying, negative times 8 gives me negative 8 plus or minus square root. 8 squared is 64. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Then negative 4 times 16 is negative 64. All divided by 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, so now discriminant, we can simplify it. 64 minus 64 is 0. So that's negative 8. It's going to be plus or minus the square root of 0, but we don't need to write that. So the discriminant goes away. And remember, if the discriminant equals 0, right, so we go back. If the discriminant is 0, we should have only one solution. So if the discriminant goes away, all we have left is negative 8 divided by 2, which gives us negative 4 as our x-intercept. So x equals negative 4. So we just have that one solution there. We don't have a plus or minus. Okay, going on to this one here, this bottom left one. Again, A, B, C, always start off with that. I have my A, I have my B, I have my C. So my A here is a 1, B is 8, C is 30. So this is negative 8 plus or minus square root, B squared is 8 squared, minus 4 times A times C. All divided by 2 times A, which is 2 times 1. So now simplifying this out, this here simplifies to negative 8 plus or minus square root. 8 squared is 64. 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 30 gives me a negative 120 divided by 2. So now simplifying the discriminant, 64 minus 120 gives me a negative 56. We have negative 8 plus or minus square root of negative 56 divided by 2. So if we're looking at the discriminant, that there gives me a negative 56. And remember the rules for the discriminant, if we have a negative discriminant, then we have no solutions. So for this graph here, for that bottom left one, we have no solution. So you're done as soon as you get a negative for your discriminant. And then our last problem on this page, A is -1, B is 8 again, and C is -3. So we're going to use the quadratic formula. This is going to be, oh, why is that there? -1. So using the quadratic formula, I'm going to plug it in. I'm going to plug it in right here. So let's pretend this doesn't exist. So negative from the formula, B is 8 plus or minus square root B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A, which is -1, and then simplify. Negative B, that gives me a -8 plus or minus square root of 64. -4 times 1 is a +4. 4 times -3 is a -12. All divided by -2. Okay, now I'm going to simplify the discriminant here. That's going to be 64 minus 12. Everything else stays the same. So this is -8 plus or minus square root of 52 divided by -2. So now the square root of 52, it doesn't break down evenly. There's no number multiplied by itself that equals 52. So we're going to split this and just plug it straight into a calculator. But we're still going to split it into 1 plus and 1 minus. So this is going to be -8 plus the square root of 52 divided by -2. And then a separate one that's -8 minus the square root of 52 divided by -2. Right, remember that a discriminant is positive. It's a positive 52, so we have two solutions. And for this one, you will absolutely need a calculator. And you can plug it in with the numerator first. So the top first, so if you do -8 plus the square root of 52, press enter. And then take your answer and divide it by -2. And you should get, and I'm going to round to 2 decimal places here, 0.39 as one of your x-intercepts. Then you want to do the same for the negative side, for the minus one. So you have -8 minus the square root of 52. Press your enter sign. And then you still want to divide that by -2. And you should get about 7.61. 7.6. And I just rounded it to 2 decimal places. So those two there will be your 2 x-intercepts. Okay, and then remember the discriminants is what we started discussing. So we did the top left one. We can go ahead and do it again just for more practice. We plug it straight in to here. That's my A, that's my B, that's my C. So it was B squared, which was 13 squared, minus 4 times A times C, which was 6. And again, we already calculated this out when we did the quadratic formula. This was the 13 squared was 169 minus -4 times 5 times 6 was 120. So a discriminant here was 49. It was a positive number. So we had 2 x-intercepts. So if you look at the graph for this here, notice that we had our 2 x-intercepts there. And these are the 2 numbers that we got for the x-intercept. And now to double check the second one here, if this is my A, this is my B, this is my C, B squared would be 8 squared again, minus 4 times A is 1, times c is 16. 8 squared was 64. So this was the square root of 64. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 16 was a negative 64. So this is the square root of 0. And remember, when you have the square root of 0, right, so our discriminant's 0, we only had one x-intercept, and it's right there. So you can see that on that graph, we just had that one x-intercept because the vertex is on the x-intercept. The bottom left one, here's my A, here's my B, here's my C. So B is 8 squared minus 4 times A times C. This was 64 minus 120 when you simplify it out. And then at the end, we got that it was a square root of a negative number. So 64 minus 120 was negative 44, something along those lines. 64 minus 120. It was negative 56. So we had a discriminant of a negative number. Here's our x-axis here. Notice that this graph doesn't cross the x-axis, so it doesn't have any x-intercepts. It's above the x-axis and it opens upward. So discriminant was a negative number, so we had no x-intercepts. And our last one here, you can see the graph, we already have two x-intercepts, and we've already found it. So b squared would be 8 squared minus 4 times a times c. 8 squared was 64. Negative 4 times negative 1 is a positive 4, times a negative 3 is a negative 12. And that was the square root of 52. That's the square root of a positive number. There's our two x-intercepts again. Okay, so remember, discriminant tells you how many x-intercepts that you have. And the quadratic formula tells you what they are.